always gonna have bad games, bad moments, etc. However, sometimes players just never recover from these moments. So, we're gonna have a look at 10 players who had a particular moment, a game, which completely changed the course of their careers after, and after that moment they just never were the same player. So this is a lot of these are for varied reasons. We've got a real variety here, and again, if I put a player here doesn't mean I think they've had a bad career or anything. A lot of these, were like world class, and then maybe had a bad game and maybe just weren't quite at the level after that. It doesn't mean I think they're bad or anything, but yeah, we'll get into it now. Let me know if they are in no particular order, but at the end of the video I'll probably say which one I think was the worst. Let me know which one you think was the worst, and anyone who I missed out, put in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it, but let's begin. Starting off, number 1, Asamoah Gyan. Now, it is difficult to decide how Ghana should be remembered for their performance in the 2010 FIFA World Cup, especially for Ghanaians. Every African football fan is familiar with Ghana's journey in 2010. The Black Stars were one penalty kick away from becoming the first African country to reach the tournament semi-finals, after Cameroon and Senegal failed to break the quarter-final ceiling. A Ghana free kick caused havoc in the Uruguay box, with Dominic Adea heading what appeared to be a goal-bound effort, but Luiz was on the line and stopped the ball with his hand. Suarez was sent off and Ghana received a penalty. The audience was ecstatic. Asamoah Gyan stepped up. He had already scored penalties against Serbia and Australia in the group stage to advance Ghana to the knockouts. He couldn't possibly miss it, could he? He did, striking the ball against the crossbar to force a penalty shootout, which Ghana ended up losing. One could argue that the quarter-final match between the Black Stars and Uruguay was the World Cup 2010's sliding doors moment. It had the same effect on Asamoah Gyan's career, who was playing for Rennes in France at the time. Scoring a last-minute goal in the extra time period of a World Cup quarter-final would have given him a lot of attention. At that time he was considered a promising striker, and after his great performances that World Cup, if he had put that penalty away to send Ghana to a semi-final, he could have joined a major club. But in the end his confidence would be crushed, and he only had a couple decent spells, but ended up playing for Sunderland, Al Ain, Shanghai, Shabab, Kayaspor and North East United. Not the career people expected before that penalty was being taken. Number 2, Rob Green. Robert Green made a terrible mistake for England, one of the most scrutinised teams in the world, in their opening game against USA at the 2010 World Cup on the 12th of June. The event itself does not require much analysis. Everyone knows how it transpired. 4 minutes in, Steven Gerrard scored a well-worked goal and England looked relatively in control. In the 40th minute, the US took advantage of some sloppy English defending to gain possession in their half. Clint Dempsey, of Fulham at the time, turned Steven Gerrard before unleashing a shot on the goal. This was not a thunderbolt of a shot. It didn't deflect. It wasn't famous for its devastating swerve. It was a knuckleball, nor did it move with its usual swing or swagger. It took 2 bounces off the ground in the box before landing on Robert Green's gloves. Instead of ricocheting forward for the goalkeeper to bounce on. The ball deflected into the bottom left corner. Green has been predictably tight-lipped about discussing that game, that moment over the years. It was a really low point for him, and it appears to have been the catalyst for his career's downturn. After what should have been a routine save ending up in a goal, he had a solid Premier League career with Norwich and West Ham, a few decent years with QPR and Leeds, before finishing his career as a reserve goalkeeper. And while he had a solid career, Green's England career was in the gutter after that shocking moment. In fact, he never played a single minute of that World Cup, being dropped for David James straight after, and then had to wait 2 years for his next cap, which would be in a friendly match, which would prove to be his last. If he hadn't made that mistake, he would have played the whole World Cup for England, and maybe he could have played for some bigger clubs than where he eventually ended up. Number 3. Loris Karius. On the 26th of May 2018, Liverpool played their first Champions League final since losing to Milan in 2007. The Reds were set to face Real Madrid, a European powerhouse boasting Cristiano Ronaldo, Karim Benzema and Gareth Bale among their ranks. Despite an early injury to Mo Salah, the Reds were in the game until goalkeeper Loris Karius made a huge blunder. While trying to play out the ball from the back, Karius rolled the ball into Karim Benzema, who scored. And Sadio Mane got Liverpool back into the game, but to make it worse, he made another error and deflected Gareth Bale's long-range effort into his own goal, and Real Madrid won 3-1, with Karius responsible for 2 goals. The following year, Liverpool signed Alisson, and Alisson would take over as number 1, and Karius would eventually be loaned out. That night in Kiev would live on in Karius' nightmares, as he did not play a single competitive minute for Liverpool after that moment. With Alisson in, Karius was out, and he signed a 2-year loan deal with Turkish club Besiktas. His time in Turkey began promisingly, but the mistakes continued. The German would return to his homeland on loan to Union Berlin. The same themes would repeat themselves as he spent the majority of the season on the bench. 3.5 years later, Karius is the 4th choice goalkeeper at Newcastle, still looking for redemption and shaking off the narrative of what happened that night. To be fair, he did play the Carabao Cup final last year and wasn't awful, which was a nice moment for him. But it's very sad, to be honest, to see what's happened to Karius, as he was actually a decent keeper before this, but he's clearly just never been able to recover, and his confidence was shattered. Number 4, Jerome Boateng. On May the 6th, 2015, Jerome Boateng was well and truly destroyed. In the first leg of the Champions League semi-finals between Barcelona and Bayern Munich at the Nou Camp, we witnessed one of the most iconic goals we've ever seen from Lionel Messi, where he had 3 touches to sit down the defender and then dinked the best goalkeeper in the world at the time, Manuel Neuer. Everybody was shocked, and this goal is still one of arguably Messi's best ever goals. But the defender who was sat down and humiliated was Jerome Boateng, and he was destroyed by this moment. Just imagine, you're at the time one of the best defenders in the world, and the whole world on the biggest stage has just seen you been sat on the floor by an attacker. It must have been hard for him, and he admitted it was hard. Rafinha, one of his teammates at the time, said later that it was a tough moment for him because he was getting, memed, clowned on the internet, and he said nobody mentioned the goal to him ever, as they could all see he was hurting. While Boateng recovered and was still a fantastic defender and had a great career, there were a couple years after this where he just wasn't himself, and the goal definitely had a negative effect on his career. Number 5, Jonathan Woodgate. Bobby Robson called Jonathan Woodgate one of the top 4 English central defenders in the Premier League, along with Sol Campbell, Rio Ferdinand and Gareth Southgate. He had that kind of talent, but injuries hampered him, limiting him to 37 appearances over a season and a half. Despite being injured all the time, Real Madrid saw enough in the 24-year-old to pay £13.4 million to bring him to the Bernabeu in 2004. Jonathan Woodgate hadn't played in 17 months, but was thrown in right away against Atletico Bilbao 4 games into the La Liga season. Woodgate, undoubtedly eager to impress on his return to football after injury, and his debut for Madrid, hoped to score on his debut, and that's exactly what he did after only 25 minutes. It was the dream start. The only issue was that it was in the wrong end. Woodgate, now determined to prove his worth to Madrid's sceptical fans at this point, let his enthusiasm get the better of him when he was first booked for diving in on Carlos Gubugu, and in the second half he was booked once again and eventually sent off. He'd waited 13 months to make his Real Madrid debut, and after 66 minutes he left the field with a red card and an own goal. He never made more than 3 consecutive appearances in La Liga that season, and he left on loan to Middlesbrough with just 14 Real Madrid appearances in all competitions, and his career at the top level was finished after that disastrous debut. Next up, number 6, David Luiz. Prior to the 2014 World Cup, David Luiz was frequently ranked as one of the best defenders in the world. After a string of outstanding performances for Benfica, he joined Chelsea in 2011 and played an important role in the club's FA Cup and Champions League triumphs that season. Then came the 2014 World Cup semi-final between Brazil and Germany. Luiz was chosen to captain the team in Thiago Silva's absence, and he presided over the worst 90 minutes in Brazilian history. After being humiliated 7-1 on home soil by Germany, Brazil manager Scolari described the experience as the worst day of my life, and David Luiz no doubt felt the same way, as he was left devastated after the match in tears. This harmed David Luiz's reputation considerably. Everyone turned to PSG, who had signed him 2 months earlier for £50 million, and during his 2 seasons in French football, he did win domestic competitions, but still had some bad moments in the Champions League, and suddenly people started viewing him very differently. Luiz returned to Chelsea in 2016 and ended up winning the Premier League and finishing runner-up in the FA Cup that season. But he transferred to local rivals Arsenal in 2019, where inconsistent performances and often shocking errors indicated that he was nearing the end of his career. People's perceptions of David Luiz changed after the 7-1 defeat at the World Cup, and despite club success later on, his career and reputation took a massive hit. Nobody ever considered David Luiz a world-class defender from that point on, despite his successes, and even now, his legacy is always viewed as a bit of a rash, inconsistent defender, all because of that 7-1 defeat. Number 7, Valeri Bojinov. In 2010, in a game for Sporting Lisbon for the Portuguese Cup, at the 92nd minute, Sporting decisive penalty kick that would, if scored, give the team the victory in the cup. The regular penalty taker for Sporting, Matheus Fernandes, prepared to take the shots, but Valeri Bojinov demanded that he took the penalty. He hadn't scored a goal for a while, was often injured, and had missed the last 3 penalties before this one. Despite this, he took the ball from Fernandes, pushing him away and insisting he would take the shots, despite all his teammates demanding that he give it to Fernandes. And that proved to be a very, very bad decision. He failed to score, infuriating the supporters and Sporting managers, who subsequently banned Bojinov on the basis that he disrespected the decision of the coach and therefore the rules of the club. Sporting declared Bojinov persona non grata, which meant that he was forbidden from entering the stadium of a training academy due to his actions. I don't think I've ever seen a player be forbidden to even enter the training pitch by his own club. And after that game, he was running around lower tier clubs and was more known for showing up next to Bulgarian pop stars and models than football. He became a total meme in his country after being one of Serie A's greatest prodigies in the mid-2000s. He ended his career playing for amateur football clubs. And if he had just not taken that penalty, it could have been a very, very different story for Bojinov. Number 8. Maicon. Back in 2010, Spurs had not competed in the European Cup or Champions League for 48 years. But now, here they were, and led by Harry Redknapp, they were determined to do it their way. And poor Maicon was caught in the crossfire. Spurs were drawn in the same group as the holders at the time, Inter Milan, who had just won a treble, beating Pep Guardiola's Barcelona in the process. And the Inter team was exceptional, possessing the likes of Javier Zanetti, Wesley Sneijder, Samuel Eto'o, Lucio and Walter Samuel. Maicon was cornered the world's best right back at the time, and the season before he was named the 2009-10 UEFA Club Defender of the Year, and his performances earned him a nomination for the Ballon d'Or. And in the game, their class showed. Inter were 4-0 up at half-time and cruising, but in the second half, things changed, and Maicon probably wished that his manager had rested him or taken him off at half-time, because what happened next would change his career for the worse. A young, hungry Gareth Bale decided that he didn't want to be embarrassed and instead absolutely destroyed the Inter Milan team and danced past their whole team in the second half, scoring a hat-trick and literally being unstoppable. His pace was electric, his dribbling was too hard to handle. The likes of Zanetti, Samuel, Lucio were scrambling on the floor to stop him. But the man who had the hardest afternoon was Maicon, who was torn to shreds in what was one of the most brutal performances we've seen in the Champions League. And things didn't get any better for Maicon, as they had to play each other again at White Hart Lane, where Bale put the final nail in the coffin for Maicon, providing 2 assists and ripping up Maicon for the second time. Maicon was absolutely slated in the Italian media for his performances and the world media, and this really marked the end of his career at the top level. He would leave Inter that season for Man City, where he barely played, and then spent some time in rest of his career in Brazil, and in fact, it wasn't even in the Brazilian top flight. He was spending his time in the Brazilian 4th division at points. So Bale essentially sent Maicon into a very early retirement. Number 9, Iker Casillas. Now, I'm kinda cheating here because this wasn't one game, it was one whole tournament that ruined his career. Now, Casillas is of course a legend. I'm not saying he's bad, but his career at the top level for club and country was finished in a matter of weeks, and it all happened in the 2014 World Cup. Spain were going into the tournament as favourites, as they had just won the previous World Cup, with Casillas performing incredibly, with an iconic save in the final to win Spain the trophy. But things were far from the same in 2014. In the opening match, Spain ironically faced the team they beat in the final of the last World Cup, the Netherlands. And it was 1-1 at half-time, a very close game, and Casillas would produce another iconic performance in the World Cup versus the Netherlands in the second half. Except it was iconic for all the wrong reasons. Spain were dismantled in the second half, losing 5-1, and Casillas was at fault directly for 2 goals, losing the ball and gifting the goal for one of them. After the game, he apologised for his performance and said it was the worst game of his career. And in the second match, it didn't get any better. Against Chile, Casillas made yet another glaring error. For the second goal, punching the ball straight to the Chile player, who scored, and Chile won 2-0 to knock the holders out in the groups. He was dropped for the final game and subsequently dropped as number 1 for Spain for the young and hungry David De Gea, and retired from international football not long after this disaster. And to make matters worse, while Casillas, the Real Madrid goalkeeper at the time, dropped a disaster clause at the World Cup, a certain Costa Rican keeper named Keylor Navas emerged onto the scene with an incredible performance at the World Cup, which prompted Real Madrid to ditch their keeper Casillas after a shocking display and buy Keylor Navas instead. The 2014 World Cup couldn't have gone any worse for Casillas, as he lost both his club and national team starting spots. While he had a decent time at Porto, his career at the peak of football was over. And finally, number 10, David Ginola. David Ginola was a sensational player and one of the most gifted players to ever play in the Premier League, and enjoyed a very good career. However, his France career was not so spectacular and was ultimately cut short after 1 game. Although Ginola was a very prominent French player, he did not see much action with the France national team, being capped only 17 times in his career, and the main reason was for what happened in 1994. Ginola is famous in France for his mistake in a 1994 FIFA World Cup qualifying match against Bulgaria. France needed only a draw in their final group qualifying match in 1993 to qualify for the finals of the 1994 World Cup, and Ginola had come on as a late substitute for Jean-Pierre Papin. With the score level at 1-1, in the last minute of the match, Ginola overhit a cross intended for Eric Cantona. The ball was collected by Emil Kremlev, who launched a quick Bulgarian counterattack, which resulted in Emil Konstantinov scoring the winning goal. Bulgaria won exocet missile through the heart of French football and as the assassin of the team. After being barricaded by French fans and branded the assassin of French football by the French press, Ginola moved to England, signing for Newcastle, leaving PSG. Houlier's successor, Aim Jacquet, regularly selected Ginola for international matches, but only used him as a substitute. Ginola played his last match for the national team in 1995, and he never featured much for France after that moment versus Bulgaria. And to be honest, his club career took a massive hit as well. You have to feel for him here, as he got blamed by his whole country and forced to leave France, all because of an overhit cross. Brutal. But there we go. Those are 10 players who had their careers ruined by one moment. If I had to pick one who had their career ruined the most, it's gotta be Loris Karius for me, but who would you pick and who did I miss from the list? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in another video. Peace.